Before I say anything else, I need you to understand one thing. I have been sitting in front of this camera for 20 minutes trying to figure out how to start. 20 minutes. Because what I'm about to tell you is the most important thing I have ever said in 85 years on this earth. And I only get one chance to say it right, so I'm just going to say it plain. My name is Melissa Botha. I am 85 years old. I live in Stellenbosch in the Western Cape of South Africa. And on November 28th, 2025, 3.5 months ago, I died on my kitchen floor. My heart stopped for 6 minutes and 52 seconds. And in those 6 minutes and 52 seconds, I stood face to face with Jesus Christ. Now, I know what some of you are already thinking. Here we go. Another one of these videos. I understand that. I truly do. I am an old woman who can barely work this phone. You have no reason on earth to take what I say seriously. But I am asking you to stay, not because of who I am, because of what Jesus showed me about the people you walked past this morning. The person sitting outside the grocery store with a cardboard sign, the family you saw on the news living in a tent city, the children in countries whose names you can't quite pronounce who are going to bed hungry tonight while you watch this video in a warm room. Jesus showed me who those people really are. Not who the world says they are, not who your economy says they are, not who your neighbourhood taught you to see when you look at them, who they really are. And I am here to tell you what he showed me is going to change the way you see every single person you look past for the rest of your life. If you have ever walked past someone suffering and told yourself it wasn't your problem, this video is for you. If you have ever sat in church on Sunday and gone home to a comfortable life and never once let the gap between you and the poorest person in your city actually trouble you, this video is for you. And if you are that person, the struggling one, the overlooked one, the one who has wondered if God even notices you at all, this video is especially for you because Jesus spent 6 minutes and 52 seconds showing me something about you that the world has been hiding for centuries, and I am not leaving this earth until I tell you what it is. Stay with me. Let me tell you who I was before November 28th. Not the version I would have given you before that day. The carefully arranged version, all the respectable parts at the front and the uncomfortable parts kept neatly out of sight the way you keep the messy room closed when company comes. The whole story. Because the whole story is the only one that makes what Jesus did make any sense at all. I was born in 1940 in Stellenbosch, Western Cape, South Africa. For those of you who have never been to Stellenbosch, it is one of the most beautiful places on this planet. I say that without exaggeration. Mountains that turn purple in the late afternoon. Oak trees older than any living person lining the main roads. Vineyards going all the way to the horizon. Cape Dutch homesteads built in the 1700s with their whitewashed walls glowing in the sun. It looks like a painting. It looks like somewhere God sat down and took special care. I grew up inside that beauty. My father owned a vineyard, not enormous. We were not fabulously wealthy by any global standard, but comfortable, deeply, securely comfortable. We had a large home. We had staff. We had a church pew that was understood to belong to our family. We had the particular quiet confidence that comes from never once in your life having had to lie awake wondering if you could pay the rent. I want you to understand what that kind of upbringing does to a person. It does not make you cruel. It does not make you mean. It makes you unaware. There is a particular form of blindness that wealth produces. So not the dramatic blindness of someone who hates the poor, but the quiet, comfortable blindness of someone who simply does not need to look. When you have enough, you stop noticing the people who do not because you are evil, because noticing would cost you something. And you are never in a position where you have to pay that cost. I was that person for 84 years now. I need to say something about South Africa that is difficult but necessary. I grew up during apartheid, and I need to be honest with you about what apartheid actually was. Because there are young people watching this who know the word but not the weight of it. Apartheid was not just laws. Apartheid was a complete, official, church-endorsed way of seeing. It said that different people belong to different categories of existence, that certain lives were worth more than others, that the poverty of brown and black South Africans was not a historical injustice. It was the natural order. It was how things were supposed to be. And the church, my church, the Dutch Reformed Church, the church I attended without fail every Sunday of my childhood, had for generations provided the theological backbone for all of it. I was raised inside that theology, not with cruelty, with complete, sincere, unquestioned conviction. When I drove through a township, when I saw the tin shacks pressed together, the muddy roads, the children playing in the dust, I was not unmoved. I was comfortable with my unmovedness. I had a framework that explained it. Things are the way they are. Some people have more, some have less. That is how God arranged the world. Be polite, be charitable at Christmas, but do not disturb the arrangement. I married Peter Botha in 1962. Good man, worked the land, loved his family, sat in the same church pew beside me for 46 years until the heart attack took him in 2008. Some days, the empty chair at the kitchen table still catches me off guard. The particular shape of the silence a long marriage leaves when one half of it goes. We had 3 children, Annalie, Johan, and Francois, who nearly died of meningitis at 4 years old, who is now 62 and still the one I worry about most, which is perhaps the fundamental injustice of parenthood. After Peter died, I stayed in our house. My children wanted me to move. They still want me to move. I am still refusing. These are my flaws. I know every creak in them. This is where I belong until the Lord himself comes to collect me. And on November 28th, 2025, the Lord came very close to collecting me indeed. But first, let me finish telling you who I was, because this is the part I am most ashamed of and the most necessary. For 84 years, I drove past poor people, not just in townships, everywhere. The man at the traffic light with the cardboard sign, the woman on the bench outside the shopping centre with her bags around her, the children I saw on the news in refugee camps, in flooded villages, in places so desperate that even the act of surviving them was a daily miracle. I saw them. I felt something when I saw them. I want to be honest about that. A flicker, a small, brief discomfort. And then I looked away. I tithed faithfully. I want to say that. Every month without fail, 10% of my income went to the church. I donated to charities at Christmas. I sponsored a child through one of those organisations. I sent the monthly payment. I received the letters with the photographs. I showed the photographs to my friends. But sit at the table. Actually be present with a poor person. Actually, let their reality touch my comfortable life. See them as individuals rather than as a category called the poor. A problem to be managed from a safe distance with checks and good intentions. that I did not do. And every now and then I am ashamed to confess this, and I am confessing it anyway because Jesus told me to confess it. There was a thought, quick, quiet, barely examined before I put it away again. Why don't they just work harder? Things can't be that difficult if you really try. Surely there must be opportunities if they would just... I never finished those thoughts out loud, but I thought them, and Jesus, it turns out, heard every single one. November 28th, 2025, a Friday. I had been up since 5:30. Old people do not sleep. You may have noticed this about us. We wake before the world has decided to begin, and we sit with the quiet until it does. I was in my kitchen making rusks. Traditional South African buttermilk rusks, hard, dry biscuits you dunk in your morning coffee until they soften. One of the genuine pleasures of old age that nobody can take from you. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window. That Western Cape morning light, golden, specific, the kind that painters have been chasing for 300 years and never quite capturing. I remember the smell of the rusks in the oven. I remember thinking I needed to call Annalie back. She had called the day before, and I had missed it and meant to ring her that evening and then forgotten, the way I forget things now, the way time moves differently at 84. I remember reaching for my mixing bowl on the high shelf. And then, no gradual warning, no building pressure, just immediately, completely, a fist closing around my heart from the inside. That is the only way I can describe it. Something gripping it, squeezing. The pain went down my left arm and up into my jaw simultaneously, and the nausea that came with it was so sudden and overwhelming that the kitchen seemed to tilt sideways. I am not a dramatic woman. I have lived through a lot. I do not panic easily, but standing at that counter, I knew. The way you know things when you are 84 and have lived long enough for your body to speak to you honestly. This is serious. This is the real thing. I let go of the mixing bowl. I heard it hit the counter, a dull, heavy sound, very far away suddenly, as if someone had turned the volume down on the world. I reached for the counter's edge to steady myself. My legs had other ideas. I went down slowly. The kitchen tiles against my cheek were cold and smooth. I had those tiles laid in 1989, 36 years of cooking on top of them, of grandchildren running across them, of mornings and evenings and ordinary Fridays like this one. I thought, Elise is coming at 9. She will find me. Hold on. My granddaughter Elise comes every Friday now. She has done this since I broke my wrist in 2023. She is 26 years old, and she is the one who looks most like Peter, and she is, I think, the best of all of us. I thought, hold on. And then the world went white. Not dark, not the gentle dimming people describe when they fall asleep. White, immediate, complete. The white settled, and I was standing somewhere, not floating, not drifting, standing, both feet properly, on something I could feel entirely clearly, even though I could not see what was beneath me. The first thing I noticed, before anything else, was the absence of pain, not just the chest, everything, the arthritis in my hands that woke me at 2 every morning, gone. The deep ache in my lower back that had been my companion since 2017, gone. The tiredness behind my eyes that had lived there for years, the particular exhaustion of being very old in a body that is working very hard to keep going, gone. I felt like I did when I was 40, maybe younger. I looked at my hands. They were my hands, the familiar shape of them, the way the index finger on the right hand curves slightly from an old injury, but young. The knotted arthritic knuckles, smooth, the liver spots gone. The skin loose and papery from age, firm and young and capable. I turned them over and back, just to be sure. And the light. I need to try to explain the light, and I know I will not do it justice. I have lived my whole life in the Western Cape. The light there is exceptional. Photographers and painters come from everywhere in the world for it. That golden afternoon light that falls across the vineyards and turns everything it touches into something worth keeping. I have taken it for granted in the way you take for granted any beautiful thing that has always been part of your life. What was around me in that place made Western Cape light look like a candle, not brighter in the way that hurts, warmer in the way that holds, like standing in the full presence of something that was not just illuminating the space, but was glad, actively, specifically glad that you were in it. It came from no direction. It was simply everywhere. The way love is supposed to be everywhere, present without a source you can point to, just there, and the peace. I want you to think about something. Think about the last time you felt genuinely, completely, entirely at peace, not relaxed, not comfortable, at peace. The kind where every anxious thought you have ever had, every regret, every worry, every quiet shame you carry is simply not present, not suppressed, not managed, not there. I cannot tell you the last time I felt that in my living life, but standing in that place, I felt it so completely, so overwhelmingly, that my first thought, and I want to be honest about this because it is important, my first thought was not, where am I or am I dead? My first thought was, oh, so this is what it was supposed to feel like the whole time. The peace was not the absence of something, it was the presence of something, something that filled every hollow place in me that I had been filling with everything else my whole life, with work and family and routine and busyness and Christmas donations and the comfortable arrangement of a comfortable life. It filled all of it at once. And then the voice came. I will not insult you by trying to describe it adequately. It came from everywhere, the way the light came from everywhere, from no single direction, just present. And it said my name. Melissa, one word. I have heard my name spoken many, many times, by my mother when dinner was ready, by my father when he was proud, by Peter in the dark of our bedroom for 46 years, by doctors, by grandchildren, by friends at the door. In all of those times, I have never heard my name carry in a single word the complete knowledge of everything I had ever been, thought, done, failed, hoped, whispered, or tried to hide. Complete knowledge. And underneath the knowledge, something that did not pull away from any of it. Complete love. Not love that had reviewed my record and decided I had done well enough. Love that had seen every single thing I just told you. The thoughts at the traffic lights, the checks that kept poor people at arm's length, the comfortable unnoticing of 84 years, and had not moved 1 inch away. That was in my name. In one word, I turned, and he was there. He was a man, Middle Eastern. And I want to say that plainly because I grew up in a church full of blue-eyed paintings, and the reality was something different. Dark hair, dark beard, olive skin. He looked like someone from the part of the world he was actually from. He could have been from anywhere between Cairo and Tehran. He looked like a carpenter. He looked like a man who had worked with his hands and knew it, but his eyes, I keep coming back to his eyes because they are the only thing I witnessed over there for which I have absolutely no comparison in 85 years of living. It was like looking into something that had no bottom and no edges, like looking at the ocean from a high cliff for the first time and suddenly understanding in your body, not just your mind, what infinite actually means. Not frightening, vast. And In those eyes, everything I had ever done was already known. Every thought I had thought, every person I had walked past, every year I had spent comfortable while people around me suffered in ways I chose not to examine too closely. All of it known. And he was looking at me with those eyes, and he was not disgusted. He was grieving, not for himself, for me, for what I had missed, for what 84 years of comfortable Christianity had cost me. Without my ever understanding I was paying a price. I fell to my knees, not as a choice, as a response, the way your knees buckle when something hits you that your body cannot hold standing up, the way you collapse under the weight of being truly, completely, finally seen. He knelt in front of me and he said, "Melissa, I know you. I have always known you." And I wept, the way I had not wept since the morning they told me Peter was gone, open, completely. Without any of the composure I had spent 8 decades maintaining. He let me weep. He did not hurry me. When I finally looked up, he was still there, still kneeling, still those eyes. He said, "You drove past them for 60 years, Melissa." Not as an accusation, plain, true, the way a doctor states a diagnosis, not to hurt you, but because you need to know. You gave money. You sponsored a child and kept the photograph. You thanked God every Sunday that you were not in their position, but you never once truly let yourself see them. You kept them at a distance that felt like charity, but was actually a wall. I could not speak. "And I am not here to destroy you with that," he said, "because the wall was built long before you were born. You inherited it. You were handed it the way every generation hands the next generation its blindness and calls it wisdom. The weight of what I am about to show you is not only yours to carry." He paused, "But some of it is, and you are old enough and honest enough to bear it. So I am going to show you what you missed, because I am sending you back. And when you go back, you are going to say what you saw." He stood, he extended his hand. "Are you ready?" I looked at his hand. I saw the scar, right through the centre of the palm, the nail mark, not dramatic, not theatrical, just there, present, real in the way that only the truth is real, and every comfortable theological distance I had ever maintained, the pleasant Sunday morning Christianity that cost me almost nothing and asked almost nothing, I felt it dissolve. I took his hand. I want to stop here before I tell you what he showed me, because I want to say something directly to you. I know this is a long video. I know some of you are already thinking about clicking away. Maybe the children need something. Maybe you have dinner to start. Please stay. What I am about to tell you, this is the reason the video exists. Everything before this was to help you understand who was receiving the message. Now I am going to tell you the message itself, and by the time I am finished, I believe this with everything I have left, you will not see the world the same way you saw it when you sat down. Vision 1, seeing the poor, the way Jesus sees them. The first vision opened like a curtain pulled back. I was standing in a township, not looking at it from a car window, not observing it from a safe distance. I was in it, at ground level, in the dust, with the corrugated iron shacks around me and the narrow paths between them and the sound of life happening in all directions. And I want to tell you what the first thing was that hit me. It was not the poverty, it was the life. Actual, specific, irreplaceable human life happening in every direction. A woman laughing at something her neighbour said across the path between their homes. A real laugh, the full kind, the kind that takes over the whole face. A teenage boy kicking a football made from plastic bags bound with rubber bands, concentrating on it with the seriousness of someone who takes seriously what they love. a small girl holding her little brother's hand on the way to somewhere, doing it with the natural authority of a child who has been doing it as long as she can remember. I had driven past this kind of place 10,000 times in my life. I had never once stood in it, and Jesus said, "Look at them. Not look at the poverty, not look at the problem. Look at them." And something happened that I cannot explain in purely rational terms. It was as if a filter I had been wearing my entire life was lifted. A filter I did not know I was wearing, one that had been reducing these people quietly, invisibly for decades, from fully human individuals to a category, the poor, a problem, a situation, something that required a response of some kind, but not necessarily presence. The filter lifted, and I saw them. Specifically, individually, each one completely real. The woman laughing, her name was Ntombi. I did not hear it said. I simply knew it the way you know things in that place. She was 43 years old. She woke up at 4:30 every morning to walk to a bus stop 2 kilometres away in the dark to get to a job cleaning offices that paid her barely enough to cover the shack rent and the children's school fees. She had done this for 11 years, and every morning before she left, while the children were still sleeping, she knelt on the concrete floor of her home and prayed. Not the polite, formal, well-arranged prayer of someone who has everything and adds God to the list of things they are grateful for. The prayer of someone for whom God is not an addition to a full life. God is the life. I saw an old man sitting on an upturned crate outside his door with his face lifted toward the morning sun, eyes closed. His name was Ezekiel. He was 79. He had a singing voice that his church called a gift directly from heaven. And every Sunday, he led worship in a tin-roofed building that held 180 people packed together so tightly that in summer, the air barely moved, and not one of them left early. On Thursday evenings, he ran a Bible study in his home, 5 people, then 12, then 30, until they were spilling out the door. He had never been to seminary. He had left school at 14. He knew more about the presence of God than anyone I had ever sat beside in a cushioned church pew in my life. I saw a little girl, 7 years old, a yellow dress 2 sizes too big, bare feet, sitting on a doorstep, helping her younger sister learn to tie her shoes. Her name was Busisiwe. She could not yet read properly because there were 41 children in her classroom and 1 teacher and a shortage of everything, but she could recite the 23rd Psalm and the Sermon on the Mount from memory because her grandmother had spoken them to her so many times they had become part of her bones. Jesus said, "Do you see them now?" And I wept, not politely, not with the controlled, respectable grief of a well-raised woman. I wept the way I should have wept the very first time I drove past a place like this 60 years ago. "This," he said, "is what you have been missing, not the poverty, the people inside it, every single one of them known by me individually, every single one of them with a name I spoke before. The world began. Every single one of them as precious as you are, as exactly as loved as you are. Without exception, without hierarchy, without any version of the arrangement you were taught was the natural order. Vision 2, what the poor have that the comfortable have lost. The vision changed. I was now watching 2 things simultaneously. The way you can sometimes see 2 things at once in a dream, both completely clear. On one side, a small church in a township, tin roof, concrete floor, no air conditioning, 160 people in a space meant for 80, plastic chairs in uneven rows, a hand-painted banner on the wall with a verse from Psalms. They were worshipping, and I want to try to tell you what that worship sounded like, because it is the most important thing I witnessed in those 6 minutes and 52 seconds. I have sat in beautiful churches my entire life. Cape Dutch churches with thick walls and soaring ceilings, cathedrals, well-attended, well-resourced, well-rehearsed congregations with professional sound equipment and choirs that have practiced twice a week for 30 years. I have never, not once in 85 years, heard anything that sounded like what was coming out of that tin-roofed building. It was as if these people worshipped with something they could not afford to leave outside. They had nothing to perform with, no polished presentation, no carefully managed impression. They came in with everything they were and gave it completely, and the sound of it was alive in a way that made every beautifully arranged church service I'd ever attended feel, by comparison, like a well-rehearsed rehearsal, real and performance. That was the difference. That was the only difference. On the other side of the vision, a large, comfortable church. I will not describe it specifically. Cushioned pews, professional sound, congregation in their Sunday best. The worship was technically correct. The hymns were familiar. The sermon was intelligent. The people were sincere, but something was thin, like food that looks beautiful on the plate but does not nourish you. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Quietly, as if he had said it 10,000 times, as if he meant it more fully each time. Melissa, the comfortable have enough of everything else to fill the space where I am supposed to be. Their prayers are often the prayers of people who already have what they are asking for as a backup plan. The poor have no backup plan. When they come to me, they come with open hands, because open hands are all they have, and open hands receive everything. He turned to me. The faith you saw in those churches, the faith that kept Ntombi walking 2 kilometres in the dark at 4:30 every morning and still arriving at worship on Sunday with something in her that has not been broken. That is not the consolation prize of people who lost the real competition. That is the real thing. That is what I died for. That is what you have been sitting next to your whole life without knowing it was there. Vision 3. The history that wealthy churches erased. The vision grew darker. I need to warn you, this one was hard to watch. I am not going to soften it because Jesus did not soften it. He showed me history, South African history, the real version, not the comfortable, self-justifying version I was taught in school under a government that had every reason to teach it wrong. I saw the Cape Colony in the 1600s and 1700s. I saw the Dutch East India Company arriving with its ships and its ambition and its complete confidence that the world existed for its benefit. I saw the enslaved people brought from Madagascar, from Mozambique, from India, from Indonesia, families separated, people packed into ships, lives reduced to a number in a ledger. And then, this is the part that broke me, I saw the farms of Stellenbosch, my Stellenbosch, the beautiful wine country, the oak-lined roads, the Cape Dutch homesteads glowing in the afternoon light, the place that looks like a painting, the place that looks like paradise. I watched enslaved people build it, not as a historical abstraction. I watched specific people with faces carrying the stones that became the walls of homes that look exactly like the homes I have admired all my life. I watched their labour become the foundation of the comfort I was born into and spent 84 years taking for granted. And then apartheid, the formal architecture of the same old arrangement, now with government paperwork and church blessing. Lord, I said, I cannot. You must, he said gently, because you cannot love what you do not see clearly, and you have not been seeing clearly. This is not about guilt. I am not showing you this so you can feel terrible and then go home and change nothing. I am showing you this so you can understand that the poverty you drove past is not random. It is not the natural order. It is the accumulated weight of what was done to those people's grandparents and great-grandparents by people who looked exactly like you, and who, most of them called themselves Christians while they were doing it. He said, the church I died for was used to justify this. The book I gave them was weaponized to defend it. My name was spoken over arrangements that would have made me weep, that did make me weep, and the people this was done to, the people you see in the townships today, they are still carrying the weight of what was built on their backs. And most of the churches that benefited from the arrangement are still giving comfortably to charity at Christmas, still keeping the poor at exactly the distance that costs nothing real. Vision 4, heaven and the great reversal. And then he showed me heaven. I have been sitting with this for 3.5 months, trying to find language large enough for what I saw. And I am telling you plainly, I cannot find it. I will give you what I have. The first thing that hit me was not what heaven looked like. It was who was there. I saw Ntomba, the woman who woke at 4:30 and walked 2 kilometres in the dark and knelt on concrete to pray before her children woke up. She was standing in that light, and she was, I have to use the word radiant because it is the only word close enough, and it is still not close enough. Not just glowing, transformed, wearing something that made every beautiful thing I had ever seen in my physical life look like a rough sketch, standing with the complete, unhurried dignity of someone who has always known, underneath everything the world did to reduce her, who she actually was. She was worshipping, and the sound of her voice in that place, I cannot write it down. I can only tell you I heard it and I understood for the first time, not as a concept but as an experience, what the Bible means when it says the last shall be first. It does not mean they receive a consolation prize later for surviving now. It means they were always the ones who knew what actually mattered. They always knew. The world just couldn't see it. I saw Ezekiel, the old man with his face turned to the morning sun. That voice, the voice his township church called a gift from God. In heaven, it was not just a gift anymore. It was a revelation. It was a man finally singing in the exact space his voice was built for, and the space was large enough to hold everything he had to give. I saw Busisiwe, the little girl with the yellow dress who could recite the Sermon on the Mount because her grandmother had spoken it into her bones. She was not 7 anymore in this vision. She was fully herself, whatever age means the fullest expression of who you are. And she stood among the scholars and the theologians and the great teachers of every century, and she belonged completely because she had learned in a language that needs no translation, that outlasts every institution, that cannot be taken away by poverty or injustice or a classroom with no books. She knew the words of Jesus. She lived the words of Jesus. That was her qualification, and it was sufficient, completely, without question. Jesus stood beside me, watching my face. This is how I see them, he said. Every single one. Not a problem, not a category, not a charity case. Ah, my beloved children, the ones the world ranked at the bottom, I have placed them in the seats of honour. The ones the world stripped of everything, the pretense, the security, the comfortable distance from reality. They came to me with open hands, and open hands receive everything I have to give. He looked at me directly. Blessed are the poor, Melissa. I said that on a hillside 2,000 years ago, and I meant every word of it, not as a comfort for people who have no other option, as a precise description of spiritual reality. The ones this world takes everything from, they are often the ones who find what the comfortable spend their whole lives searching for. Vision 5. What the rich church is missing. Jesus showed me one more thing. And I say this carefully because it is the vision that applies most directly to me and possibly to you. He showed me wealthy believers, not wicked people, not people who are consciously cruel, good people, sincere people, people who prayed and went to church and gave to charities and meant it genuinely. He showed me what they were missing, not what they had done wrong, what was absent from their faith that the poor possessed in abundance, the closeness, the raw, unmediated intimacy with God that comes from having nothing else to substitute for it. The prayers that cost something, prayers prayed in the dark, in circumstances where praying was the only option still available. The faith that had been tested in conditions where, if God did not show up, nothing would. He showed me wealthy believers worshipping sincerely, genuinely, but at a measured distance, a spiritually comfortable distance. Their faith was real, but it was also managed, the way you manage a well-maintained investment portfolio, regular deposits, occasional reviews, steady, predictable returns. Then he showed me the tin-roofed church again. The difference was not in sincerity. The difference was in need. The comfortable believers had so many other things filling the space that God is supposed to fill, so many other sources of security, so many other ways to manage the anxiety of being alive, that there was less room for the particular kind of closeness that only desperation makes possible. I love the wealthy as completely as the poor, Jesus said, but the wealthy have a harder road than they know, not because wealth is sin, because wealth is a powerful competitor to dependence on me, and a person who does not depend on me truly, practically, with nothing else to fall back on, cannot receive the thing that only total dependence makes room for. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Melissa, there is something the poor have been carrying that the comfortable church has been writing checks trying to find for decades, and those two groups have been kept apart by history, by economics, by pride on both sides, by the enemy who knows exactly what would happen if they ever sat down together at the same table for far too long. He turned to face me completely. That has to change, and it changes one table at a time. The final vision was not a warning. It was a possibility. He showed me what could happen, not what will automatically happen. What could happen if the comfortable church, the giving from a distance church, the check-writing church decided to actually cross the distance. I watched it like a sunrise, starting from one point and spreading outward. A wealthy woman, she looked a little like me. I noticed that. I think he wanted me to notice it, knocking on a door in a township, not with a food parcel held at arm's length, not with a clipboard and a good program, knocking and being invited in and sitting down, sitting at the table, staying, not for an hour with one eye on the watch, staying. And what happened between that wealthy woman with all her safety nets and that poor woman with her open hands and her concrete floor faith, the exchange that happened between them produced something in both of them that neither could have generated alone. The wealthy woman received something she had been looking for in every comfortable church service for 30 years. The poor woman received something that had been used as a weapon against her people for 3 centuries, genuine presence from a person with the privilege to be anywhere else and the choice to be here. And together, at that table, in that small tin-roofed home, they produced something the enemy had been working overtime for generations to prevent. The kingdom of God, visible, right there, in a space 11 feet by 11 feet with a cracked concrete floor and a hand-painted verse on the wall. This, Jesus said, is what I died for. Not programs, not charities, not the managed, comfortable, arm's-length version of love that costs nothing real. This, 2 people at a table. The currency of my kingdom flowing across the wall the enemy built. Do you understand why he fights so hard to maintain that wall? Do you understand what happens to his kingdom when it comes down? I understood. Go back, Melissa. Tell the comfortable that they have been driving past their own inheritance. Tell the poor that I see every one of them, that not one morning of 4:30 prayers in the dark has gone unheard, not one act of faith in impossible circumstances has gone unnoticed by me. Tell them what you saw in heaven. Tell them what their glorified faces look like. Tell them they are not forgotten. They have never been forgotten, not for 1 second. He put both hands on my shoulders. And tell everyone, rich and poor, comfortable and struggling, that the table is the answer, not the check. The table. Sit down, stay. That is where the kingdom begins. He said, it is time to go back. I thought about everything I had just seen, about what it would mean to say it out loud. At 84 years old, in my community, among people who have known me for decades and have a particular idea of who I am. I thought about whether anyone would listen to an 84-year-old woman from Stellenbosch, and then I thought about Ntombi's face in the light, about Ezekiel singing, about little Buzisawi standing among the wise, and I thought, if there is one person watching who stops at the traffic light tomorrow and actually looks, who actually sees the person with the cardboard sign as a specific, beloved, irreplaceable individual with a name Jesus knew before the world began. If there is one person who's giving crosses from a distance into a presence, one table, one moment of actually sitting down and staying, that is worth whatever time I have left. Send me back, I said. He smiled, and then the kitchen tiles were against my cheek again. Cold, smooth, the oven still on, the smell of rusks. And Elise, my granddaughter who comes on Fridays, was on her knees on the floor next to me doing chest compressions and crying and praying out loud at the same time. She had arrived to find me there. She had already called for help. She had been doing compressions for, she told me later, nearly 4 minutes. My 26-year-old granddaughter who learned CPR in a first aid course and never imagined she would use it on her grandmother. Kneeling on my kitchen floor on a Friday morning while the rusks were still in the oven, she saved my life with her own hands, weeping and praying the whole time. I still cannot think about that without, she is the best of all of us. I told her that when I came home. She told me to stop being dramatic. She is so much like Peter. It takes my breath away. 6 days in hospital. The cardiologist, a thorough, careful woman, mid-50s, the kind of doctor who says exactly what she means, came to sit with me on day 4. She said, Mrs. Botha, 6 minutes and 52 seconds without sustained cardiac function at your age, in a residential setting without immediate intervention. The statistical probability of the neurological outcome you are presenting with. Full cognitive function, clear memory, better than your records from 18 months ago in certain markers, is so low I am going to be honest with you and say I do not have a satisfying explanation. I looked at her and I said, "I do?" She smiled the careful smile that doctors smile, but she wrote something in her notes. I saw it when she turned the clipboard. She wrote, "Unexplained recovery, patient alert and fully oriented." Fully oriented. I have been more fully oriented since I came back than I was for years before. I started telling people what I had seen, my church friends first, women I had sat beside in Bible study for 30 years. I told them about the township vision, about Ntombi, about what the poor person's worship sounded like compared to ours, about Jesus's words, "Blessed are the poor," about sitting at the table instead of writing the cheque. The room got very quiet. One woman, San Murray, who has been my closest friend since the early 1980s, said carefully, "Melissa, you went through a terrible physical event. The mind does extraordinary things under that kind of stress." I said, "San Marie, I know what ordinary is. I have had 85 years of ordinary. This was not ordinary." Another woman said, "But we do give, Melissa. The church has a very strong outreach program." I said, "I know. I have given to the outreach program for 15 years. Jesus was not talking about the program. He was talking about sitting at the table." Nobody had a good answer for that. My pastor, a good man, genuinely good, called me into his office. He listened to everything carefully. Then he said, "Melissa, I am not dismissing your experience, but we have to be careful about allowing personal visions to become doctrine. The Bible is our complete authority." I said, "Pastor, I have been reading that Bible for 80 years, and in 80 years of reading it, I drove past the poor every single day. I do not think the problem was the Bible. I think the problem was what I was willing to do with what the Bible said." He had no answer for that either. I went home, and that night I almost did not include this section in the video, and then I decided I had to, because the enemy uses the same tactics every time, and you need to be able to recognize them. I woke at 2:47 in the morning. Something was in my room, not a person, not an animal, a darkness that had weight, that moved. That was aware of me specifically, the awareness of something that has been watching and waiting and has now decided to act. I am 85 years old. My heart barely functions properly. I want to be honest with you. I was frightened, but I also thought about Ntombi walking in the dark at 4:30 every single morning with nothing but faith. I thought about the people Jesus showed me who had faced things that should have broken faith completely and had not broken, had come out the other side more themselves, more certain, more glorious. If they could hold against it, so could I. I sat up in my bed. I said, my voice shaking, I will not pretend it wasn't. I said, "In the name of Jesus Christ, you have no authority here. Get out of my house." The temperature dropped. I could see my breath in the dark. A voice, not in the room, in my mind, said, "You are old. You are weak. Nobody is going to listen to an old woman from South Africa." And I got angry, because that is exactly what I had said to Jesus. Nobody will listen to an old woman from South Africa. The enemy was using my own doubt as a weapon, throwing my own words back at me. I said louder, "The Lord sent me back with a message. I do not care if one person hears it or 1 million. I was told to say it, and I am going to say it. You have been keeping the poor and the comfortable apart long enough. You are done. Get out in Jesus' name." And I prayed, not the quiet, folded hands prayer I had prayed my whole life, the kind of prayer I had heard in that township church vision, loud and specific and spending everything. The darkness left, the room warmed. I sat in my bed at 3 a.m, shaking, 84 years old, heart barely working, completely certain. If the enemy was fighting this hard to keep it quiet, that meant it needed to be said loudly. Let me speak to you directly now. 3 groups of people watching this. If you are poor, if you are the one struggling, the one overlooked, the one whose dignity has been chipped away by a world that assigns value based on what you have rather than who you are. I stood in heaven and I saw you. I saw you the way Jesus sees you. You are not at the bottom of anything. You are not a problem to be addressed or a statistic to be managed or a category on a charity organisation's annual report. You are beloved by name, specifically, completely, from before the world began. Every prayer you have prayed from a position of having nothing else, he heard it. Every morning you got up and kept going when the comfortable people cannot imagine how he was there, not watching from a distance, there. The faith that kept you going in conditions that should have broken you, that is not weakness dressed up as something else. That is the real thing. That is the thing Jesus called blessed. That is the thing that the comfortable are paying programs and programs and programs to try to find. You have it. You have always had it. You are not forgotten, not for one moment, not for 1 second. If you are comfortable, if you have enough, if you give from a safe distance, if you write the check and feel the obligation satisfied, I spent 84 years being you. I drove past. I gave at Christmas. I kept the photograph of the sponsored child on the refrigerator. I thanked God in my prayers that I was not in that situation. Jesus showed me that what I was driving past was not just a social problem. It was my own spiritual inheritance. The faith in those tin-roofed churches. The prayers of people who have no safety net except God himself. The particular, irreplaceable depth of a relationship with God that can only be built from open hands. That is not something to feel charitable about from a distance. That is something to go to, because those people have something the comfortable church has been trying to manufacture with programs and worship conferences and self-help series for decades. And you cannot get it by writing a check. You can only get it by sitting at the table. I know it is uncomfortable. I know it crosses distances that have been carefully maintained for a very long time. I know it requires the one thing that charity does not require: presence. Actually being there. Go. Sit at the table, stay long enough to hear a name. It will change you. I know because it changed me, and I only got 5 minutes and 52 seconds of it before he sent me back. To everyone, the kingdom of God is not organised the way this world is organised. At the top of this world, wealth, power, influence, comfort, security, the ability to keep suffering at a manageable distance at the top of his kingdom. Open hands, dependent hearts, people who have nothing else and so have found the only thing that lasts. Blessed are the poor. He said that on a hillside 2,000 years ago. He meant every word. And Ntombi in her glory, and Ezekiel singing, and Buzi Siwe standing among the wise, they are his evidence. Not his charity cases, his evidence. I am 85 years old. My heart is not strong. The doctors remind me of this regularly and with great kindness. I am at peace with that. What I am not willing to do is leave without saying what I was sent back to say. So I am saying it. Ntombi hangs her washing in the dust of a township, and in heaven she is radiant. Ezekiel lifts his face to the morning sun on an upturned crate, and in heaven his voice fills every space it was built to fill. Busisiwe holds her sister's hand on a doorstep in a dress 2 sizes too big, and in heaven she stands among the wise. And I, who drove past their world for 60 years in a comfortable car on my way to a comfortable life, only got to stand in that light because Jesus, in his grace that I will never fully understand, brought me there anyway. He showed me what I had been missing. He is giving you the same chance. Right now, you do not have to die to see it. You just have to stop. Stop at the traffic light. Actually look. See the person, say their name, even if only in your heart, and then ask Jesus what he is asking you to do about it, because the table is not far from where you are sitting right now. Someone is waiting at it, and they have something you need. His name is Jesus. He sat at every table. He is waiting for us to do the same.